Welcome to module number 2, session 3. In this module, we would analyze the calibration of qualitative scales across perspectives. Calibration of qualitative scales. Let's look into the likelihood factor. Determining likelihood is subjective unless a large homogeneous data set can reliably determine the possibility of any risk in the future. Rarely this is the case, so there is a subjectivity element to most possible assessments. Let's say, for example, if you go to a particular machine operator and ask him or her, what is the chance that this particular machine might break down because of a poor weather condition, you might get different responses by different machine operators. There's a bit of subjectivity. The best practice is to utilize the same likelihood scale within the whole organization. Good to kind of have some predefined scales. On the basis of the organization, it would be useful for a likelihood scale to have within 3 to 5 different points. It could be a high, medium, low kind of environment, or it could be starting from low, very low, low, medium, high, and very high. You could kind of have different scales, 3, 4, or 5 different points. However, scales have different gradations and they need to be used accordingly. For example, the way in which likelihood may be expressed by using the following examples using a 5-point scale would be something along the lines of this particular risk is almost certain not to happen. And this could be on the lower end of the probability scale. Less likely to happen, equally likely or unlikely to happen, more likely than not to happen, and almost certain to be happen. So this could be another end of the spectrum. Another example would be there's a less than 20% chance of this risk happening. There's a 20 to 40% chance of the risk happening. 40 to 60% chance, you could give it a score of 3. If there's a greater than 80% chance of happening, you could kind of give a score of 5, for example. Another example would be never heard of in the industry, could be given a score of 1. Expected once every 5 years could be a score of 2. Expected once every 2 years could be given a score of 3. Expected every year, a score of 4. Expected multiple times a year, could be given a score of 5. This could be probability scales along the lines of frequency of occurrence. And then the other factor besides likelihood is the impact scales. Unlike likelihood, best practice is not utilize this, the best practice is not to utilize the same impact scale over the whole organization, but instead to calibrate particular influence scales on the basis of capacity and appetite for risk for each and every objective that is at risk. Now, let's say, for example, we might be working on a particular investment, which could be a very tight timeline driven investment, in which case the timeline scales could be different to another project which is not a time-bound kind of initiative. So it's important that we calibrate the scales depending upon the objectives of that particular initiative. So we've got a few definitions over here. Risk capacity is defined as an amount as well as a type of risk that the organization can pursue its objectives. And then risk appetite is a type and amount of risk that the organization is willing to take in pursuit of its objectives. And risk tolerance is a measurable threshold to show the tolerance's outcomes range for each and every objective at risk, utilizing the same units for measuring performance for that particular objective. Can I just give you some examples? Let's say on the risk cost front, we could have a tolerance of, let's say, 10 or minus plus or minus 10%. let's say the total cost of the project is $1 million, plus or minus, let's say, 10%, anything that kind of goes beyond 10%, you might want to kind of bring it to the notice of the relevant, decision makers. Risk appetite is how much of risk is your organization willing to take? That's basically appetite. Capacity is the total amount of risk that an organization can pursue to achieve its objectives. So good to kind of know some of these definitions. Risk capacity is usually related to financial capacity as well as the strength of the balance sheet or funding's security for a project. Risk capacity also applies the organization's reputation and how much risk the organization can take with the customers, end users, regulators, investors, shareholders, staff, or other stakeholders' trust. Let's say, for example, a construction company which has got a high reputation of, maintaining, let's say, zero deaths at construction sites, would like to kind of, make sure that it has no tolerance towards, let's say, critical injuries or deaths at workplace. And we have risk appetite, which must be expressed as risk tolerances. Organizations may also choose to have a risk appetite description, but this is only for communication purposes, not to design an effective system for applying risk management over the organization. So we've got some good examples over here of risk appetite. So a client organization invests in a project and has an internal rate of return of 12%. And this percentage may be perceived as the lowest tolerable return, but a lower IRR could be tolerated. Always there will be an upper limit of return that shows the best case without investing more funds and resources in the project. The range within the upper and lower thresholds is the appetite for organization's expression and should fit within the capacity. Assuming the tolerance range was within 6% as well as 20%, therefore the calibration of a 5-point impact scale for internal rate of return could be. If there is a variation of less than 1% from a 12% target, let's say that particular risk could be a significant impact. But if the impact results in a 1 to 2% variation, that could be a minor impact. Anywhere between 2 to 5% could be moderate impact. 5 to 10, let's say, could be major, and anything greater than 10 could be a catastrophic impact. The same principle is applied to other objectives, for instance, operational performance. Remember, we talked about likelihood and impact. We could also think about calibrating scales on performance, operationally, safety performance, ESG performance, environmental, social, and governance performance, time to completion, customer satisfaction, etc. But the main concept of risk appetite can be applied to each and every perspective. Clearly, as the establishing governance is part for a program or a project, the appetite for risk for each and every change objective should be determined.